The early morning mist clung to the surface of my private lake like a ghostly veil, swirling gently as a cool breeze whispered through the trees. This was my sanctuary, a place where I could escape the noise of the world, where nothing existed except the rhythmic chirping of birds, the occasional rustle of deer in the brush, and the slow, steady ripple of water as I cast my line. Fishing had always been more than just a pastime for me. It was a connection to nature, a way to unwind, to think, to be present in the moment. As the lure broke the surface of the water, I exhaled, letting the peaceful atmosphere settle over me like a warm blanket. But peace, as I would soon learn, was about to be shattered in the most obnoxious way possible. At first I didn't hear her. The only sounds were the soft lapping of water and the distant rustling of wind through the trees. But then came the crunching of hurried footsteps on gravel, growing louder by the second. I frowned, turning my head slightly, already feeling that familiar, instinctive irritation that came with being interrupted in a moment of solitude. And then, there it was. The voice. Shrill, indignant, and laced with a level of self-righteous fury I hadn't encountered since the last time I got into a debate with a door-to-door evangelist. "Excuse me. What do you think you're doing?" I sighed, closing my eyes for a second before turning around. Standing on the edge of my property was a woman in her mid-50s, her short, graying hair pulled back into a tight bun that seemed to be fighting a losing battle against the humidity. She wore an overpriced yoga outfit, the kind that rich suburban moms bought so they could feel spiritual while sipping on $12 oat milk lattes. Her face was twisted into an expression of pure outrage, her eyes locked onto my fishing rod as if I were standing there with a severed human head instead. I blinked. "Fishing," I said, not really sure what other answer she was expecting. Her face contorted like I had just admitted to clubbing baby seals for sport. "Fishing?" she repeated, her voice dripping with disgust. "You mean murdering innocent animals for your own sick pleasure?" "One of those people." I sighed, already regretting engaging. "Lady, this is my lake. I'm fishing on my own property. Maybe you should calm down." "Calm down?" she shrieked, throwing her hands up. "You're killing a living, breathing creature, and you want me to calm down? What kind of monster are you?" I sighed again, but deeper this time, glancing back at the water as if debating whether it was worth even responding. I had met my fair share of vegans before, most of them perfectly reasonable people who just chose not to eat animal products. But then there were the militant ones, the ones who treated every carnivore like they were personally responsible for the downfall of civilization. "Look," I said, keeping my tone level, "I don't know who you are, but I own this land, this lake. I have every legal right to fish here, and I'm not going to stop just because you don't like it." She took a step forward, her eyes flashing with rage. "You think just because you own this land that gives you the right to do whatever you want? That's not how the world works. Nature belongs to everyone, and I refuse to let you destroy it." I stared at her, trying to decide whether she was being serious or if this was some elaborate prank. "You refuse to let me, what? Fish? On my own property?" She nodded sharply, crossing her arms like she had just laid down the law. I let out a short laugh. "Well, that's too bad because I am going to fish and you can't do anything about it." Her face darkened like a thundercloud. "Oh, we'll see about that," she snapped, yanking out her phone. "I'm calling the police. You're poaching on public land." I blinked again, this time in sheer disbelief. "This isn't public land, lady. I own this. I have property records. The lake is on my land, which means I have the legal right to fish here." She either didn't hear me or chose not to acknowledge it, because she was already pressing numbers on her phone, her voice shrill as she spoke. "Yes, officer. I'd like to report an illegal poacher. He's right here, right in front of me, harming wildlife. He's torturing fish, killing them with hooks and leaving them to suffer." I shook my head, muttering a curse under my breath. This was beyond ridiculous. I didn't care if she wanted to scream at me from her little moral high ground, but calling the cops? Wasting their time over this? That was a whole new level of entitlement. 20 minutes later, sure enough, a patrol car rolled up the driveway. Two officers stepped out, one of them looking vaguely amused while the other already looked exhausted. They had clearly been called out to nonsense disputes like this before. Karen, however, wasted no time launching into her hysterics. "There he is. That's him. He's been here for hours, slaughtering innocent fish, disrespecting nature. He needs to be stopped." The officers exchanged a look before one of them turned to me. "Sir, can we see some ID?" I nodded, handing over my driver's license and property deed before they even asked. This wasn't my first rodeo dealing with crazy neighbors. The officer glanced at the documents, then back at me. "You own this land?" "Yes," I said. "And the lake?" Karen's jaw dropped, her face twisting with frustration. So what? She demanded. That doesn't mean he has the right to kill. The officer sighed, rubbing his temples. Ma'am, fishing is not illegal. And since this is private property, he is well within his rights to do so. Karen let out a strangled noise, her entire body trembling with rage. So you're just going to let him get away with this? What kind of world are we living in where people like him can just do whatever they want? The second officer, who had been silent up until now, stepped forward with a warning tone. Ma'am, you called 911 to report a crime that wasn't happening. That's considered wasting police resources. If you continue to harass your neighbor over legal activity, we will have no choice but to issue a citation. Karen's mouth flapped open and closed like a fish out of water. You can't be serious, she finally whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. The officer gave her a long, level look. Dead serious. Karen looked like she wanted to argue, but after a few tense seconds, she clenched her fists and spun on her heel, storming back toward her house. But just before disappearing from view, she shot me one last glare, her voice dripping with venom. This isn't over, she hissed. You'll pay for this. With that, she was gone. The officers exchanged another glance before handing my ID and deed back to me. Sorry about that, one of them said. We get calls like this sometimes. Just be careful, people like her don't always let things go. I nodded, watching as their patrol car pulled away. I should have brushed it off. I should have just shaken my head and laughed about it, chalking it up as another ridiculous encounter with an unhinged neighbor. But as I cast my line back into the water, I couldn't shake the feeling in my gut, the uneasy sensation that I had just become the target of something much worse than an overzealous animal rights activist. I had no idea what was coming. But I knew one thing for sure. Karen wasn't done with me. For the first few days after our ridiculous encounter, I foolishly believed that Karen had either come to her senses or at least moved on to find another cause to screech about. The lake was quiet again, the air still carrying that crisp, fresh scent of pine and damp earth, and for a moment, I let myself think that I could finally return to my peaceful routine. The fish weren't concerned with Karen's moral outrage and neither was I. But that uneasy feeling in my gut, that lingering sense of something unresolved, never fully went away. And then it started. I woke up one morning to find strange wooden signs planted along the edge of my lake, their bold, sloppily painted letters glaring back at me like a bad joke. Wildlife sanctuary, no killing allowed. Protected habitat, stay out. Stop the slaughter, respect life. I stood there for a long moment, gripping my coffee mug, watching as a small family of ducks casually waddled past one of the signs, completely unaware that some lunatic had unilaterally declared their home a no-fishing zone. My irritation grew by the second. Not only had Karen trespassed onto my property in the dead of night to plant these ridiculous things, but she actually thought this would stop me. Fine, I thought. You want a battle, Karen? You're going to lose. I grabbed a hammer from my shed and started yanking the signs out of the ground one by one, tossing them into a pile like discarded firewood. If she wanted to whine about it, she could do it from the comfort of her own property. I wasn't about to entertain her delusions any further. But Karen wasn't the type to take a loss quietly. That afternoon as I returned from town, I saw them, people. A group of them. At least a dozen strangers standing at the edge of my property, holding up hand-painted signs covered in phrases like, "Stop the murder," and "Fish have feelings too." Some were holding megaphones, shouting slogans at the trees, while others had their phones out, filming what they clearly thought was some heroic protest against a violent oppressor. That oppressor apparently was me. I parked my truck in the driveway, taking a deep breath as I processed what I was seeing. Karen stood at the center of it all, a smug smile plastered on her face as she paced back and forth, waving her arms theatrically. "This man is a monster," she declared to her audience. "He slaughters the innocent. He destroys life for his own pleasure. And we will not let this continue." I stepped out of the truck, my patience already running on fumes. "Karen," I called, raising my voice over the shouting. "Get these people off my property. Now." She whirled to face me, her eyes gleaming with self-righteous fury. "Oh look, the murderer has arrived," she sneered, turning toward her audience. "This is the face of the man who thinks he can do whatever he wants just because he owns some land. But we say no more." The crowd erupted into cheers and I had to fight the urge to pinch the bridge of my nose. "This is private property," I said as calmly as I could manage. "You and your little fan club are trespassing." "We're protesting," she shot back. "This is a peaceful demonstration." "On my land?" I countered. "That's not how this works, Karen." She smirked, holding up a piece of paper. "Actually, it is. We're on the public road right outside your property. We have every legal right to be here. I glanced at the ground where the pavement met my land, my jaw tightening. She was right. Technically they weren't on my property. They were right on the border, screaming into megaphones about the genocide of fish. This wasn't just an annoying stunt anymore. This was targeted harassment. I stormed back into my house and called the cops, explaining the situation. The dispatcher sighed, sounding almost apologetic. Unfortunately, if they're on public property and not blocking access to your home, they're within their rights to protest. I clenched my fist. So they can just stand there harassing me all day? If they're disturbing the peace, you might be able to file a complaint, but it's a gray area, the dispatcher admitted. Do you feel physically threatened? I exhaled sharply. Not yet. But give it time. For the next week, the protests didn't stop. Every morning, I woke up to the same nonsense. Signs, megaphones, angry strangers filming TikToks about the evil fish murderer of the neighborhood. My driveway became a war zone of littered pamphlets and stickers reading, "Go vegan or go home." And the online harassment? That was a whole different beast. Karen had taken to social media, painting herself as some kind of hero fighting against the sadistic fisherman who was destroying a protected ecosystem. She conveniently left out the part where I legally owned the lake, or the fact that fishing wasn't exactly a crime. The internet, however, didn't care about facts. Soon I was getting messages. Nasty, threatening ones. "You deserve to be drowned in that lake, you sick bastard. Hope someone comes and sets your house on fire. Would be karma for all the lives you've taken. I'm watching you." That last one unsettled me the most. It wasn't the usual empty threat from some keyboard warrior. Felt real. Like whoever sent it actually meant it. I started double-checking the locks at night, carrying my shotgun when I went out to the lake, watching my back. And then things got worse. One evening, just as the sun was setting, I heard a loud splash from the lake. My first thought was that a fish had jumped. But then I saw it, two figures wading waist-deep in the water, dumping something into it. My stomach turned. I grabbed my flashlight and stormed toward them. "Hey, get out of there." The figures startled, one of them dropping a bucket into the water before scrambling toward the shore. I recognized her immediately, Karen, soaked to the knees, her eyes wild. The second person, a younger guy with a ratty man bun, bolted the second he saw me, disappearing into the trees. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, my blood boiling. Karen didn't even try to deny it. "I'm saving them," she hissed, her voice shaking with fury. "Since you won't stop killing them, I'm giving them a chance." I looked down at the water, at the murky substance now clouding the surface. The bucket she dropped was overturned, a dark residue leaking out of it. My stomach clenched. "What the hell did you just dump in my lake?" "Liberation," she spat. "You don't deserve this land. You don't deserve anything. You're a monster." I took a step closer, my voice low and dangerous. "You just committed a crime, Karen. You poisoned my water." She laughed, a sharp, manic sound. "It's their water, not yours. And soon you'll see. Soon you'll understand." She turned and ran, vanishing into the woods before I could stop her. I called the cops again, but by the time they arrived, Karen was long gone. They took my statement, but the officers seemed hesitant. "It's tough to prove," one of them admitted. "Unless we can identify the substance she dumped, it might not hold up." I clenched my jaw. "So she just gets away with it?" "Not necessarily," the officer said. "But people like her? They escalate." I exhaled, shaking my head. "Yeah. I figured that out already." That night, as I sat on my porch, shotgun resting across my lap, I realized something chilling. Karen wasn't just trying to stop me from fishing anymore. She was trying to destroy me. And if something didn't stop her soon, I had a feeling this was going to end badly. The next morning, I woke up with a pit in my stomach, that creeping feeling of unease that comes when you know something isn't right but can't quite put your finger on it. The lake had always been my sanctuary, my place of peace, but now, it felt like a battlefield. Karen had crossed a serious line last night, dumping whatever that mystery substance was into the water, and I wasn't about to sit back and let it slide. Before doing anything else, I grabbed a jar from my kitchen, marched down to the lake, and scooped up some of the water where the murky residue still lingered. I didn't know much about water testing, but I knew enough to get it analyzed. If Karen had poisoned my lake, I needed proof. The town had a small environmental testing center that handled cases of illegal dumping, and after an infuriating few hours of waiting, the technician finally came back with the results. "Sir, this isn't just some harmless prank," she said, her face grave. "Your water has traces of rotenone." I frowned. "What the hell is that?" "It's a pesticide," she explained. commonly used to kill invasive fish populations. It suffocates them, essentially paralyzing their gills until they die. I felt my stomach drop. She poisoned my lake, I said, my voice eerily calm. Yes, the technician confirmed. And depending on how much was dumped, it could take weeks or months for the water to recover. If you have fish in there, a lot of them might already be dead. Rage boiled beneath my skin, hot and suffocating. This wasn't just Karen being an entitled activist anymore. She had intentionally poisoned my lake, my land. She had gone beyond harassment. This was destruction. This was war. I drove home with my hands clenched on the wheel, my thoughts racing. I had no doubt Karen saw this as some twisted form of liberation, that she truly believed she was saving the fish from me. But she hadn't saved anything. She had slaughtered them in one of the most agonizing ways possible. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A single bullet casing sat on my porch, positioned dead center like a calling card. I stopped breathing for a second, my eyes locked onto it, my pulse thundering in my ears. My first thought was that maybe it had fallen from my own shotgun, but no, I hadn't fired a single round in days. Someone had put it there. On purpose. I picked it up, turning it over in my fingers. It was a 9mm casing, small, deadly, and fresh. Karen. This was her warning. My first instinct was to call the cops, but I hesitated. What were they going to do? Show up, talk to her, and then leave? They hadn't done anything about the protests or the threats or even the trespassing. Unless she physically attacked me, they weren't going to lift a damn finger. And I had the sinking suspicion that was exactly where this was headed. That night, I sat on my porch with my shotgun resting across my lap, watching the tree line. The air was thick with tension, the usual peaceful hum of the forest replaced with an eerie silence. Even the crickets seemed to know something was wrong. Then just past midnight I saw it. A shadow moving through the trees. I stiffened, gripping the shotgun a little tighter. The figure was careful, creeping along the edge of my property, staying just beyond the moonlight. But I knew that posture. That build. Karen. I stood, my voice cutting through the night. I see you, Karen. She froze. For a second, neither of us moved. Then, with a sudden burst of motion, she lunged forward. I barely had time to process what was happening before a sharp, blinding pain exploded in my side. Gunshot. I staggered back, my breath catching in my throat as my legs gave out beneath me. My shotgun slipped from my hands, clattering against the porch as warm blood spread across my shirt. Karen was standing over me now, holding a small pistol, her hands shaking but her eyes wild with something between triumph and madness. I told you, she whispered, her voice trembling. I told you this wasn't over. I struggled to breathe, the pain radiating through my body like fire. You shot me, I rasped. You forced my hand, she said, almost regretfully. I had no choice. You were never going to stop. You kept killing. You deserve this. She knelt down, pressing a hand against my chest as if she was checking to see how much damage she had done. I'm not a bad person, she muttered, more to herself than to me. This world is full of monsters and sometimes you have to take action. I wasn't sure what was more terrifying, the fact that she had just shot me or the way she was talking like this was some kind of moral victory. But she had made a mistake. She thought I was already dying. Summoning every ounce of strength I had left, I reached out and grabbed the barrel of her pistol, twisting it upward. The movement was clumsy, fueled more by desperation than precision, but it was enough. The gun fired again, the shot going wide as Karen yelped in surprise. I used the momentum to shove her back, sending her sprawling onto the porch. Pain screamed through my body, but I forced myself to move. With one last burst of energy, I lunged for my shotgun, wrapping my fingers around the grip just as Karen scrambled to her feet. I cocked it, aiming directly at her. Don't, I warned, my voice ragged but firm. She froze, her chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. For the first time, I saw something other than rage in her eyes. Fear. You shot me, I said again, as if saying it out loud would make it more real. Karen swallowed hard, her fingers twitching at her sides. You were never going to stop, she whispered. You need help, I said. Serious help? The sound of approaching sirens cut through the night air. Someone must have heard the gunshots and called the cops. Karen's eyes darted toward the road, panic flashing across her face. She turned on her heel and bolted into the trees. I almost let her go. Almost. But then I thought about the poison lake. The bullet casing. The months of harassment. I pulled the trigger. Not to kill. Just to stop her. The blast hit the ground near her feet, kicking up dirt and making her stumble. She screamed, falling to her knees just as the police cars came skidding into my driveway, their floodlights illuminating the scene like something out of a crime documentary. Officers poured out, weapons drawn. Karen was still on the ground, her hands raised, her whole body shaking. "He shot me," she wailed. "He tried to kill me?" I let out a bitter laugh even as the pain in my side made my vision swim. "You shot me, Karen," I wheezed. The officers quickly swarmed us, one of them kneeling beside me while the others restrained Karen. "She's the one we're arresting," one of them confirmed after checking the scene. "She's the suspect." Karen's face twisted in disbelief. No, you don't understand. I was stopping him. I was saving lives." The officer didn't care. "You have the right to remain silent?" As they dragged her away, she screamed, thrashing like a wild animal. "This isn't over. This isn't over." But it was. Or at least I thought it was. As I lay in the back of the ambulance, struggling to stay conscious, I realized something. Karen wasn't the only problem. She had followers. And they weren't done with me yet. Lying in the hospital bed, the steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound grounding me to reality. The pain in my side was constant, a sharp, gnawing reminder that Karen had actually shot me. The doctors told me I was lucky. The bullet had missed any major organs, but I'd still lost a lot of blood. If the paramedics had arrived any later, I might not have made it. That thought sat heavy in my chest as I stared at the ceiling, replaying everything over and over in my head. Karen was in custody. That should have been the end of it. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I was officially the target of an extremist movement, and Karen's arrest had only made me more infamous. The news had picked up the story: local man shot by vegan activist after fishing on his own property, and within hours, social media exploded. People on my side saw Karen for what she was, a lunatic who had nearly killed me over something as simple as fishing. But her followers? They saw her as a martyr. #Justice for Karen started trending on Twitter. The narrative had already shifted. According to her supporters, she was a brave activist who had only acted in self-defense against a violent animal abuser. I was being painted as the villain, the monster who had provoked an innocent woman into an act of desperation. The fact that she had shot me first didn't seem to matter. They called me a liar, a fraud, a murderer. And then the threats started. Thousands of them flooded my inboxes, emails, direct messages, even handwritten letters sent to my house. "We know where you live. You deserve to suffer." Karen was right. The only good fisherman is a dead one. Some of them were worse. Detailed descriptions of what they wanted to do to me, how they planned to finish what Karen had started. The police advised me to stay off social media, but that didn't stop the flood of hate. Every time I tried to block one account, 3 more popped up in its place. It wasn't just online harassment anymore, it was a full-blown campaign. And then came the break-in. I had only been home from the hospital for a few days, still moving slowly, bandages tight around my ribs, when I heard the sound of glass shattering downstairs. Instinct kicked in immediately. I grabbed the shotgun I kept by my bed and moved carefully toward the staircase, my heart pounding. There were voices, whispers, footsteps. Someone was in my house. Adrenaline surged through me, washing away the lingering pain from my injury. I flipped on the lights and aimed my gun toward the source of the noise. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice hoarse but firm. For a split second there was silence. Then the scuffling of hurried footsteps. 3 figures darted toward the back door, their faces masked, their movements frantic. One of them tripped, sending something crashing to the floor, a camera. I realized what was happening just as they slipped out the door and disappeared into the night. They hadn't come to hurt me. They had come to film me. To frame me. I rushed downstairs, my body protesting every movement, and grabbed the fallen camera. The screen was cracked, but the memory card was still intact. My hands were shaking as I plugged it into my laptop and played the last recorded video. The footage was dark and shaky, but the audio was clear. A voice, young male, whispered, "Okay, we're inside. He should be upstairs. We just need to make it look like he snapped. Like he's dangerous." Another voice responded, female this time. "Yeah, we get him waving his gun around, acting all crazy. Then we leak it. Make it look like he's unstable, like he's the real threat." The recording ended. I sat there, staring at the screen, my pulse hammering in my ears. They weren't just trying to ruin my reputation. They were trying to make sure I never saw freedom again. I called the police, handed over the footage, and within hours the news was flooded with a new headline. "Break-in at home of man shot by vegan activist. Attempt to frame him caught on camera." The shift was immediate. The people who had been defending Karen suddenly had to backpedal. Her supporters had always claimed to be on the side of truth, but now the truth was turning against them. The ones who had tried to frame me were arrested, charged with trespassing, conspiracy, and attempted defamation. And Karen? Her trial was fast-tracked due to the overwhelming evidence against her. Between the eyewitness testimony, the bullet casing, and the surveillance footage of her poisoning the lake, there was no way she could talk her way out of it. She tried though. She sat in that courtroom with the same righteous fire in her eyes, claiming she had only acted to protect the innocent and that she had been driven to the edge by mind cruelty. The jury didn't buy it. Karen was sentenced to 25 years in prison for attempted murder, trespassing, and destruction of private property. Justice was served. Or at least legally it was. But the damage was already done. My life would never be the same again. Even with Karen behind bars, her supporters still lingered like ghosts. My name was forever tied to the incident, my face known by people who hated me for something as ridiculous as fishing. I couldn't go into town without getting stared at. Some people looked at me with pity, others with contempt. Businesses were hesitant to serve me, not wanting to get caught in the middle of the controversy. I had to sell my house. The lake that had been in my family for generations. Poisoned, tainted, ruined. I couldn't stay there anymore. Every time I walked outside I felt like I was being watched. Every time I heard a car slow down near my driveway, I wondered if it was another lunatic coming to finish the job. So I left. Packed up what little I had left and moved to a place where no one knew my name. But even now, as I sit in my new home miles away from where it all happened, I can still hear Karen's voice in my head, that final warning she had screamed as the cops dragged her away. This isn't over. And sometimes I wonder if she was right. Because no matter how far I run, no matter how much time passes, the internet never forgets. And neither do the people who still think she was a hero.